So far, we've discussed internal and external issues and the requirements of interested parties for the information security management system. Now we'll move on to determining the scope, which is described in subclause 4.3. Now here's another look at our mind map, and subclause 4.3 can be found under clause 4, which deals with the context of the organization. Now please note that the scope of the ISMS is a mandatory piece of documented information. Organizations have to provide it or to create it in order to get certified. Now clause 4.3 requires organizations to determine the boundaries and applicability of their ISMS to establish its scope. Now the requirements of this clause directly relate to the highlighted tasks in our project plan, and they are to determine a preliminary scope, a refined scope, a final scope, to obtain approval for the final scope, and then to reach the milestone by having an approved scope that is then documented. Regarding the context of the organization, we've already talked about the internal and external issues, so we understand the external and internal environment in which our organization operates, and we have learned or talked about the requirements of external stakeholders and internal stakeholders that we probably should or have to comply with. And this helps us in defining and deriving the scope of the ISMS. Now you may be curious about what we mean by scope in the context of an information security management system. So let's take a closer look at that. Well, the scope of an ISMS defines where and for what exactly the ISMS is applicable and where and for what it is not. Maybe you remember, but in a previous lecture on management systems, we've already talked about the scope as a key component of every management system. Like I said in the very beginning, the scope of the ISMS has to be available as documented information. As always, the standard does not specify in which form this piece of information has to be documented, so you have plenty of options to choose from. Now, when establishing the scope of an ISMS, ISO 27000 is extremely prescriptive and simply refers to taking the internal and external issues as well as the determined interested parties and their requirements into account. However, it is highly recommended that the scope should include a comprehensive overview of the organizational, ICT, and physical components. Now, the organizational scope should encompass legal entities, processes, suppliers, departments, and other relevant aspects of the organization. The physical scope should cover locations, sites, buildings, and other critical physical components of your organization. The ICT or Information and Communication Technology scope should encompass functions, services, applications, and other critical components of your technology infrastructure. Now, all combined, the organizational, the physical, and the ICT scope form and shape the scope of your ISMS, that is, they describe what is covered by your management system. Now, to give you an idea of what this is all about, I want to show you this map of the world. Let's assume there is a company which operates in the United States, in Australia, India, some parts of Africa, Asia, and South America. However, for whatever reason, the facilities located in Central Asia and Australia are not within the scope of their management system. Maybe they belong to a separate legal entity that has been excluded from the scope, or the locations excluded are providing a certain service that is not relevant for their information security, or the organization simply wants to save costs by shrinking their scope down and ultimately reducing the amount of effort necessary to audit this system. Now, the process of determining the scope of the ISMS requires a multi-step approach, and it is important to follow each step carefully to ensure a comprehensive and effective scope. First, a small but representative group of management representatives should determine the preliminary scope. Next, the functional units within and outside the preliminary scope should be reviewed, with the possibility of including and excluding some units to minimize the number of interfaces along the boundaries. And please don't forget to consider all necessary support functions when refining the preliminary scope. After evaluating the refined scope, all management within the refined scope should determine the final scope. If necessary, make any necessary adjustments to ensure that the scope is precise and comprehensive. Finally, top management should formally approve the documented information describing the scope. Now, by following this multi-step approach, you can ensure that the scope of your ISMS is comprehensive and aligned with your organization's information security goals and objectives. Now, to help you get started, we've created a scope statement template that you can download and modify to suit your specific needs. This template is a Word document designed to meet the formal requirements for documented information. So here we have some metadata that describe information like document type, classification, and so on, as well as an approval and revision history. Now, the document is structured according to the 3 scopes that we discussed in this lecture, which is the organizational, physical, and the ICT scope. Here you have some basic information that you can modify for your own organization, and you get some, let's say, templates and blueprints to insert your own information and helping you define the organizational scope, the physical scope, as well as the ICT scope. Now, by using this template, you can quickly and easily create a scope that will form the foundation of your ISMS. Simply download the template in the course resources at the very beginning of the course and customize it to suit your specific needs and use it as the starting point for your ISMS implementation project.